Ego is the Enemy, by Ryan Holiday. This summary is brought to you by Hook My Book. Ego is the part of our psyche that tells us we're better than we really are. It's the rider on a horse with our unconscious drives representing the animal, while the ego tries to direct them. It's the petulant child inside every person, the one that chooses to get his or her way over anything or anyone else. It's the need to be better than, more than, recognized for, far past any reasonable utility, that's ego. It's the sense of superiority and certainty that exceeds the bounds of confidence and talent. It's when the notion of ourselves and the world grows so inflated that it begins to distort the reality that surrounds us. Ego inhibits true success by preventing a direct and honest connection to the world around us. The author discusses 3 stages of life: aspiring, success, and failure. He argues that ego is the enemy of building, maintaining, and recovering from success or failure. He then discusses the examples of several successful individuals, including General Ulysses, German scientist Frauenfeld, and NFL coaches Bill Walsh and Tom Coughlin. The author argues that these individuals were successful because they were able to suppress their egos and focus on reality. On the other hand, unsuccessful people are unable to do so and are consequently unsuccessful. Aspire. To whatever we aspire, ego is the enemy. Isocrates was a famous teacher, rhetorician, and philosopher from ancient Greece. He wrote a letter to a young man named Demonicus, who he had recently become friends with, about how to be successful in life. He emphasizes the importance of modesty, justice, and self-control, and warns against being swayed by pain, pleasure, and flattery. He also tells Demonicus that being affable and slow to make decisions is good quality. He also advises Demonicus to constantly train his intellect. One might say that the ability to evaluate one's ability is the most important skill of all. Without it, improvement is impossible. And certainly, ego makes it difficult every step of the way. It is certainly more pleasurable to focus on our talents and strengths, but where does that get us? Arrogance and self-absorption inhibit growth. So do fantasy and vision. It's easy to be emotionally invested and infatuated with your work. Any and every narcissist can do that. What is rare is not raw talent, skill, or even confidence, but humility, diligence, and self-awareness. For your work to have truth in it, it must come from truth. If you want to be more than a flash in the pan, you must be prepared to focus on the long term. Talk, talk, talk. In 1934, Upton Sinclair published a book titled I, Governor of California and How I Ended Poverty. The book outlined his brilliant past policies as governor, which he hoped would sway voters in his failed bid for the California governorship. Although the book was a bestseller and may have helped Sinclair's ego, it had little impact on the election outcome. Sinclair lost by 10 percentage points. Talk depletes us. Research shows that while goal visualization is important, after a certain point our mind begins to confuse it with actual progress. The same goes for verbalization. Even talking aloud to ourselves while we work through difficult problems has been shown to significantly decrease insight and breakthroughs. After spending so much time thinking, explaining, and talking about a task, we start to feel that we've gotten closer to achieving it. Or worse, when things get tough, we feel we can toss the whole project aside because we've given it our best try, although, of course, we haven't. The author discusses how great work can be difficult, and how people often turn to talk to fill the void and the uncertainty of their work. The author also talks about how great work comes from facing the void instead of trying to avoid it, and how talking is only a relationship between work and chatter. To be or to do. If your purpose is something larger than you to accomplish something, to prove something to yourself, then suddenly everything becomes both easier and more difficult. Easier in the sense that you know now what it is you need to do and what is important to you. The other choices wash away, as they aren't choices at all. They're distractions. It's about the doing, not the recognition. Become a student. The author talks about how the power of being a student is not just that it is an extended period of instruction, but that it also imposes an ego ceiling on one's abilities. Even if you are a great student, you will never be as good as the master you apprentice under. The author also mentions that false ideas about oneself destroy one, and that one needs to constantly rely on humility in order to be a great student. The pretense of knowledge is our most dangerous vice, because it prevents us from getting any better. Studious self-assessment is the antidote. A true student is like a sponge, absorbing what goes on around him, filtering it, latching on to what he can hold. A student is self-critical and self-motivated, always trying to improve his understanding so that he can move on to the next topic, the next challenge. A real student is also his own teacher and his own critic. There is no room for ego there. Ego is the enemy because it blocks us from improving. When we are egoistic, we are defensive and we don't want to listen to feedback because it will make us feel weak. In order to achieve our goals, we need to overcome our egoistic tendencies. Don't be passionate. People go to events like Burning Man and TED to find their passion. Passion is important because it helps people to be excited about what they are doing and it helps people to be motivated to do things. People who have a passionate interest in something are usually more motivated to do things than people who don't have a passionate interest in something. But passion can also be dangerous because it can be a driving force that leads people to do things that they may not be prepared or capable of doing. John Wooden was a coach who never got emotional on the court, and his players, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Lou Alcindor Jr., and Bill Walton, all followed his lead and changed their names to reflect what Wooden taught them. Wooden's philosophy was about being in control and doing your job, and he never let his players become passion slaves. Eleanor Roosevelt was also a successful woman who used grace, poise, and direction to achieve success. John Wooden and Eleanor Roosevelt both had a calmness and detachment in the face of adversity that helped them achieve their goals. Passion can be dangerous because it masks a weakness, and it's important to have purpose and realism in our endeavors if we want to achieve anything great. People feel the intense passion when they are young because it is during this time that their hormones are at their strongest. However, this passion can be destructive if not used correctly. People need to have purpose and realism in mind when they are passionate about something, and they should not aim to do things quickly. Instead, they should take their time and do things gradually so that they are effective and achieve their goals. Restrain yourself. Bas Rutten, the Dutch fighter, writes the letter R on both his hands before fights to remind himself to relax. When getting angry, getting emotional, or losing restraint is a recipe for failure in the ring, restraint is a difficult skill but a critical one. It doesn't matter how talented you are, how great your connections are, how much money you have, when you want to do something, anything big and important and meaningful, you will be subjected to treatment ranging from indifference to outright sabotage. Count on it. Get out of your own head. Holden Caulfield from J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye is an example of a character who is unable to get out of their own head. John Fante from Ask the Dust is an example of a character who struggles with his ego and insecurity but eventually overcomes them. George McClellan from the American Civil War is an example of a leader who is unable to think strategically and leads his army to disaster. The author talks about how anyone, particularly the ambitious, can fall prey to this narration, good and bad. This narration can paralyze someone if it's not controlled or used in the right way. For example, General George C. Marshall refused to keep a diary during World War II because he was worried it would turn his reflective time into a performance. Living clearly and presently takes courage. Don't live in the haze of the abstract, live with the tangible and real, even if, especially if, it's uncomfortable. Be part of what's going on around you. Feast on it, adjust for it. There's no one to perform for. There is just work to be done and lessons to be learned, in all that is around us. The danger of early pride. Pride can dull your senses and change your perception of reality, making it harder to achieve your goals. It can also make you overestimate your own abilities, which can lead to injury or even disaster. It's important to be aware of and combat pride early on in your life, so you don't fall victim to its negative effects. Pride can blunt the ability to learn, adapt, and be flexible, which can lead to problems in later life. Rockefeller was a very successful businessman, but he also had a lot of confidence in himself. He was proud of his accomplishments and his trajectory in life. However, this confidence could also be dangerous in early life because it led us to become delusional. Rockefeller is one example of a successful person who said he would become the richest man in the world. There are many other examples of people who said this, but did not achieve anything. This is because their pride and arrogance prevented them from achieving anything. Hard work. Edgar Degas was a painter and poet who was known for his beautiful impressionist paintings of dancers. He had trouble writing poems, and said that it was hard to say what he wanted, and yet he had ideas. One day, he told his friend, the poet Stéphane Mallarmé, that he could not manage to say what he wanted, and yet he was full of ideas. Mallarmé's response was that it was not with ideas that one made verse, it was with words. To be a professional and an artist, one must cultivate a product of labor and industry instead of just a product of the mind. Work is required for anything to be accomplished, and this is true for anything in life. There is no end zone to achieving mastery, and the harder the work, the more accomplished one will be. This is an encouraging message for anyone who wishes to achieve anything. As a young basketball player, Bill Bradley would remind himself, when you are not practicing, remember, someone somewhere is practicing, and when you meet him he will win. Aristotle observed that without virtue and training, it is hard to bear the results of good fortune suitably. Hughes followed this principle by behaving erratically and publicly, in order to examine and understand his own impulses and how they led to his downfall. This lesson can be applied to anyone in a career, as success can be intoxicating and lead to egoism if unchecked. Ego is a dangerous force that needs to be battled with humility and values rooted in the work itself. Always stay a student. Genghis Khan was a great conqueror because he was able to learn from each new culture he encountered. He was also able to reorganize his military units and learn how to siege walled cities. His empire also brought religious freedoms to many new cultures and introduced new technologies like the cannon. Each victory and advancement that made Khan smarter also bumped him against new situations he'd never encountered before. It takes a special kind of humility to grasp that you know less, even as you know and grasp more and more. It's remembering Socrates' wisdom lay in the fact that he knew next to nothing. Most people become successful and learn a lot, but they can become too confident and think they know everything, which can lead to them not learning anything new and not being able to adapt to changes in the industry. The solution is to always be a student and to keep learning, even if it's something that is uncomfortable. Whatever we do, instead of pretending that we are living some great story, we must remain focused on the execution and on executing with excellence. We must shun the false crown and continue working on what got us here. Because that's the only thing that will keep us here. The author says that ego is a powerful force in our lives, and that it can often lead us to make bad decisions. We need to be aware of what our priorities are and what we're willing to give up in order to pursue them. It may take some courage and faith to stop ourselves from pursuing things we don't really want, but ultimately this will lead to our independence. Entitlement, control, and paranoia. The writer talks about how someone can achieve success. He says that it involves ignoring the doubts and reservations of others, taking certain risks, and being persistent in the face of ridiculous odds. He also says that these traits can feel like they've been vindicated, as when something succeeds for the first time. However, the writer warns that if these traits are not controlled, they can lead to paranoia and a loss of control. Ego is its own worst enemy. It hurts the ones we love too. Our families and friends suffer from it. So do our customers, fans, and clients. A critic of Napoleon nailed it when remarking, "He despises the nation whose applause he seeks." He couldn't help but see the French people as pieces to be manipulated, people he had to be better than, people who, unless they were totally, unconditionally supportive of him, were against him. Smart men or women must regularly remind themselves of the limits of their power and reach. Beware the disease of me. General George Marshall was an amazing general during World War II. He was respected by his fellow generals, and his skills as a leader were unmatched. He was able to keep his ego in check, and thus was able to lead his army successfully. However, after the war, the disease of me began to take over the Allied generals. They became selfish and focused only on their own interests. Marshall was the only one who was able to resist this temptation, and he was able to achieve great success without the need for honors. The author says that people in successful careers may be able to make sacrifices earlier in their careers, but as they get more successful, they may start to care more about their own success and recognition rather than the success of the team or the cause they are working on. Meditate on the immensity. Great leaders and thinkers have gone out into the wilderness to find inspiration and perspective. They have found that by being in a place where they are surrounded by nature, they can find the quiet voice they need to listen to. This allows them to be more creative and to see the world in a different way. Belisarius is a great general who saved Western civilization on 3 occasions. He was placed under suspicion by the paranoid emperor he served, Justinian, and his victories and sacrifices were undone with foolish treaties and bad faith. He was relieved of command and his only remaining title was the deliberately humiliating commander of the royal stable. He accepted the bargain that doing the right thing was enough, even when adversity could be endured and rewards considered extra. The effort is enough. When someone works on a project, whether it's a book or a business, at a certain point, that thing leaves their hands and enters the realm of the world. It is judged, received, and acted on by other people. It stops being something the person controls and it depends on them. Belisarius could win his battles. He could lead his men. He could determine his personal ethics. He could not control whether his work was appreciated or whether it aroused suspicion. He had no ability to control whether a powerful dictator would treat him well. This reality rings essentially true for everyone in every kind of life. The world is, after all, indifferent to what we humans want. If we persist in wanting, in need, we are simply setting ourselves up for resentment or worse. Doing the work is enough. Finally, the only real failure is abandoning your principles. Killing what you love because you can't bear to part from it is selfish and stupid. If your reputation can't absorb a few blows, it wasn't worth anything in the first place. End of the summary. Thanks for listening.